Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video I am going to be doing a 5x5 with a historical flair. If you're unaware, my 5x5 is a series in which I am trying to find 5-star reads. I have not succeeded thus far, but I have a different theme for each of these videos. I'll put a link to all of those previous ones in the cards up above if you are interested in watching them. This time around, however, I wanted to do some historical fiction. This is not a genre I have dived into a lot in the past, but I do have a few on my TBR that worked well for this. I tried to do a fairly wide variety from different time periods to not be reading the same stuff over and over again. I'll give you guys a little rundown of each of the books I'm going to be reading, and then I will give you guys a update at the 50% mark with a estimated rating, and then a update at the end of the book and a actual rating. First out, let's start with The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzi Lee. This was the Buy Book Club's read for December and is following a young man named Monty who is going across Europe with his best friend and his little sister. I believe this is set at some point in the 1700s and it has some LGBT themes, but honestly that's all I really know going into it. I'm pretty excited about this one. I've heard lots of good things and that it's supposed to be a very fun ride. Next, I'm going to be reading A Light Amongst Shadows by Kelley York, and I believe this is set in a all-boys boarding school at some point in the 1800s and is following these two boys who start having encounters with ghosts. I think this one is supposed to have some LGBT plus themes as well. Next, I'm also going to be reading These Violent Delights by Gong. This is supposed to be a Romeo and Juliet retelling set amongst the warring gangs in 1920s Shanghai at the same time when a fantastical pandemic is taking over the city, and the two heirs of the gangs have to work together to try and figure out what's happening. Next up, also for the Buy Book Club, is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo by Jenkins Reid. I believe this story is supposed to be following a starlet from like the 1960s and 70s who is finally telling her story to a journalist. I've heard tons of good things about this, and I am a little apprehensive to pick it up if I'm being honest, just because I really never had any interest in picking this up prior to this, but it also worked for a prompt in my Scooby-Doo readathon. I'll put a link to that right here if you want to check it out. Finally, the only one that is going to be a repeat is the 1920s in Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. However, while These Violent Delights is set in Shanghai, this one is actually set in Mexico. And I believe it is following a young woman who, while cleaning out her grandfather's mansion, finds this trinket box that when she opens it brings to life the god of the dead from Mexican folklore. Alright y'all, so that is all of the books I am planning to read for this 5x5 with a historical flair. I will give you an update when I have hit the 50% mark of the first book. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point in The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, and I have to say I've been enjoying this much more than I thought I would. I was a bit skeptical of the historical fiction aspect going into a basically a YA contemporary with a queer romance, but I've been enjoying it more so than expected. I will say, I think Mackenzi Lee really researched this. In fact, she actually has little notes at the back focusing on like the politics, epilepsy in the 18th century, as well as race relations in Europe at the time. So impressed in the fact that she has clearly put a lot of research into the story to try and ensure that it is as accurate as possible. Since I already mentioned epilepsy, must say kind of impressed to see that representation, particularly in a historical setting. Not something I've really read about in any book before, but especially in a historical fiction story. I've really been enjoying the adventure aspect of this, particularly the fact that we are having to see these noble people resort to thievery and piracy and things like that when they are clearly out of their element. It's been pretty entertaining. The characters are definitely interesting, but I will say the first 100, maybe 150 pages of the book is solely focused on setting the characters up, and not a lot really happens, so it does have a slow start, but once it gets going, it's been going pretty well so far. Starting off at the top with our main character and narrator Monty. He is a chaotic bisexual hot mess, doesn't know what he's doing with his life, and honestly, I'm here for it, loving every second of this. His sister Felicity is pushing back against the societal norms and is desperate to become a doctor even though she is a woman, and we love that. Also, not 100% sure on this, but I think there was a drop of the fact that she might be ace or aromantic, so that's interesting. And then finally, Percy, the softest, sweetest cinnamon roll, who is honestly too pure for this time period. This boy needs proper medication and love and hugs and cuddles and everything. Honestly, he needs everything. I have to say, So far, I'm definitely impressed with the character work. Monty is so unlikable, but he's incredibly charismatic. Even though you realize he's being a moron half the time, you still like him and are cheering for him, which is a hard thing to balance. On a whole, I've been enjoying this a lot, but I will say there's been a lot of touches on some serious topics that I was not expecting, such as alcoholism, suicide, child abuse, things like that, that really caught me off guard, but I think have been handled fairly well. I think based on the first half, I'm going to go with a estimated 4-star rating. I have been really enjoying this, but I definitely have had a few drawbacks. Hey y'all, so I have officially finished The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. This overall was a very enjoyable adventure story that is so much more than the summary really led me to believe. From what I'd heard about this book was there was a really great romantic element. While I do think that is true, there was tons of mutual pining, and trust me, I will sop that up like no tomorrow. While I think the development between the two characters and the necessary growth they went through to become a couple was fantastic, I would have actually liked to see more of them as a couple on the page. On the historical fiction aspect, I really enjoyed the fact that this discussed actual societal issues that were taking place during this time period, because in my previous experience with historical fiction, those can kind of fall into two categories. Either it is not really discussed at all, or it is the sole focus of the story. Here, I think Mackenzi Lee managed to do a really good job of bringing up these issues and highlighting them during this time without detracting away from the plot. It was educational, but not overbearing, and still flowed well in the story. There were lots of funny moments in this. I will say, Monty particularly can really outdo himself in trying to embarrass those around him. Honestly, it's kind of impressive. Lots of clever quips, loved that. There was one that was like, we're not courting trouble, we're merely flirting with it, or something like that, and it was very cute. As fun as this was, I do think the plot suffered occasionally. There were some situations where we go through lulls and it seemed as though nothing was really happening. We were more focusing on Monty making bad decisions. Apart from the issues and pacing and not getting enough ending romance, I really enjoyed this. It was very adorable. I really would recommend this to anybody who's wanting to like try out historical fiction, because I think this would be a good place to start. Actually, I do think I was correct in my estimated rating, and I am going to go with 4 stars on this one, so we're off to a good start. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point in these Violent Delights, and I must say I am loving this one. As I mentioned previously, is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, but I've loved Chloe Gong's rendition and modernization of so many of these characters. Starting at the top, I just think setting it in 1920s Shanghai was such a interesting aspect, but I've really been enjoying it with the whole colonialism aspect due to the fact that Juliet is Chinese while Roma's family is Russian, and they are trying to come in and take over. On top of that, we also have the whole communist regime plus the Bolsheviks mentioned from Russia. Maybe not as atmospheric as, say, Libba Bray's The Diviners, but I think she does a great job in kind of tossing in these little Easter eggs here and there to remind us of the setting we're in, and mixes with the whole mystery aspect that's taking place because of this pandemic that is starting to sweep across Shanghai. It definitely hits a little close to home when you're still living in a pandemic. Let's discuss those characters. Juliet is amazing. She's a femme fatale. She's terrifying. She has really made a name for herself, not just because she is the Scarlet Princess, but because she is fearsome and you should be scared of her. There was an amazing interaction where she is discussing the number of weapons she has managed to hide on herself while going to a party, and I love it. I love it so much. On the other side, Roma's kind of putting off this gentle giant who could definitely f you up if need be, and loving that as well. I'm hoping we will get to see a little deeper into him in the latter half of the book. Along with them, obviously, it is hard not to go through and compare every single side character to their originals, but I've really been loving the updates that's been given to them. Some of my favorites have been Roma's friends Benedict, who is supposed to be Benvolio, and Marshall, who is supposed to be Mercutio. Although we haven't seen a ton of him, I will say there was one specific paragraph talking about Marshall, which automatically made me compare him to Mickey Milkovich from Shameless automatically went to the top of my favorites list because of it. Of course, this is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, so we must discuss the main romance. I really love that this is focusing on them at 19, not when they were 15 and initially met. I think that was a smart choice on Chloe Gong's part. It makes the entirety of the story feel a lot more mature. Thus far though, I think my favorite thing that has come between the two main characters is their banter. It's amazing. As for negatives, while personally I really have been enjoying the prose, I can understand it is taking a good bit for the plot to really progress. So I guess my biggest thing is it's a bit slow. I think because of all of that, my estimated rating for now is going to be 4 stars, but I won't be surprised if it goes higher than that. I've been really enjoying this. Hey y'all, so I have officially finished These Violent Delights, and this was like everything that was promised to me about the original Romeo and Juliet, but with more things I would actually enjoy. Namely, I really liked the mystery aspect that got tossed in here, plus the fact that it's got fantastical elements just makes it all the more interesting. Lovers, enemies, lovers, romance, like it had me enthralled the entire way. On top of that, I really do just have to praise Chloe Gong's writing, because in times where even though the story might have felt like it was going very slow, her writing is just so eloquent and beautiful. It really encapsulates the mystery, the atmosphere, the true drama that's just underlying this entire story. Anytime something partaking with the plague aspect would occur, I must admit, even though this was a YA fantasy, some of her descriptions really would like make me shiver. The romance aspect, again, just phenomenal. I love that we had this hardcore badass female character while we have a sweet soft boy who doesn't like killing, but he does it anyway. That dynamic together. I also think this just handled some heavier topics that I wasn't particularly expecting, but think were tossed in nicely, such as identity, family, what's really in a name, code switching, interesting factors that worked well with this story. I must admit, I was not expecting the little twist we got in terms of the mystery here. Think it was done well, possibly because I was paying attention to a different character a lot more, so she might have done that purposefully to really kind of like catch you off guard and give you a little red herring there. But the character I was suspicious of, they ain't out of the woods yet. Oh, the ending of this makes me so desperate for the next one. I think I'm gonna give this 4.5 stars. I don't want to quite give it 5 stars just because I would have preferred more mystery in this. There was just so many good things going in here. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point in A Light Amongst Shadows by Kelley York. I love this story. I love this story so much. I'm not even a little bit surprised. Let me tell you why. Because this is not just a mystery, it's a paranormal mystery, which means there's all the more possibility this is gonna get creepy. And it definitely has. And then finally, there's a romance. Will and James are precious, and I adore both of these characters in very different ways. Instead of me just sitting here spewing all this love, I should probably actually discuss the book. So for one, I really have been appreciating the mystery part in this. As I mentioned, it does have a paranormal aspect. Both of the boys keep seeing ghosts across campus, and then particularly at one point they are together and see a very obvious ghost, and they can't really make excuses for what they've been seeing anymore after that. So that really amped up the creepy factor, but also my curiosity into what is going on. For a good majority of the first half, I did not know what the time period was until finally the boys are doing some investigating and they are looking at a yearbook. They mention that this yearbook is for 1800, I think it was 1860 to 1865. After that, they mention that it's about 11 years prior, so we're probably in like the 1870s, 1880s. Although the year hasn't been specifically stated, there are additional clues that definitely nod towards it. For example, William has a strong reliance on laudanum,
which is a opiate that I don't think really gets used anymore. There was a mention of cholera outbreaks at the school previously, and given that this is set in Britain, I feel like we can safely assume there aren't a lot of cholera outbreaks anymore. The boys in the school are punished with switches and lashes, so, you know, barbaric punishments, a bit outdated. Plus, the boys' dialect just kind of has that old English feel occasionally. But it's not too much that it is alienating to the reader. I still think this is a very easily accessible and readable story. Next, let me just talk about the two things that have made me love this story so much, and their names are William and James. As I mentioned, William is definitely kind of like the weird, awkward, nerdy kid, and James is definitely more of like the popular jock. James is kind of a softie on the inside. He loves writing poetry. Anytime somebody makes a homophobic comment, he always has a smart quip to come back with that kind of throws it in the guy's face. William, on the other side, is definitely a loner. On top of that, there's plenty of rumors going around about him because he uses laudanum. He has been rumored to possibly be gay, and that's caused some drama, but in reality, he's such a sweet boy who clearly just needs someone to pay attention to him. And James sweeps in and just automatically is like, I'm gonna befriend him. Both of the boys definitely have kind of like a dark background aspect going on that we haven't quite been revealed to yet. Okay, I can't remember what my final point is. Maybe it'll come back to me later and I'll tell you in the next clip. We'll find out. I don't usually like estimating 5 stars in these videos just because I think that's sort of setting myself up for failure. I'm gonna do it. What the heck? Let's get crazy. Let's get wild. I'm gonna estimate my rating for this one to be 5 stars for the time being. I really have been enjoying it. It's been very good. I think it's just a well-written story so far.
Hey y'all, so I have officially finished A Light Amongst Shadows by Kelley York, and I really enjoyed this. It was such a cute and fun read. I finally remembered what the point I wanted to talk about in the first clip was, and it was that I believe, based on what is presented to us, James is gay and Will is bi, so that was some nice representation for both of those sexualities. After finishing this and looking at the book as a whole and the layout of the story, I do think the first half of the book is very much focused on establishing the characters and their relationships. Not a bad thing. As someone who's very character driven, I really enjoyed that. I do want to give a little bit of a content warning for sexual assault discussions because that is in there. I think having that establishment at the beginning of the book to bring us to care about James specifically really helps further the mystery, because if we're not invested in James and his relationships, we wouldn't really get invested into the mystery. However, because the first half of the book is so character focused, the mystery does kind of suffer in the second half, where it seems as though the ending is a bit rushed and everything's kind of crammed in there. Midway through reading this, I did actually find out this is a start of a series. Not a good or bad thing, just kind of want to make you aware in case you read this. I think my biggest complaint is the mystery is a hair predictable. But with that, I always love a nice little paranormal aspect. I think it kind of raises the stakes there, and it definitely did in this, particularly when it came to the climax. I will say one thing that kind of caught me off guard is that the last chapter, I'm not quite sure if I would call it an epilogue. It wasn't labeled as one, but felt like one, was actually from William's perspective, whereas the rest of this book has been in James' perspective. So I'm curious to see if the next one in this series is going to be focusing on William first off. I definitely probably will continue this series just because I want more ghost hunting adventures. I realized that this scratches the same itch for me that Charlie Davidson does, and that's one of my absolute favorite series. Unfortunately, I don't think I was correct in my estimated rating of 5 stars. I told you I was apprehensive about giving that because I knew I was gonna let myself down. Instead, I think I'm gonna go with a 4 stars on this one. Still so enjoyable, very good, but the fact that the mystery was predictable for me just means I can't really give it a 5-star rating. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point in The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I don't know how to feel about this. I'm kind of in the middle. Obviously, the story is very much set in the 50s and 60s Hollywood, and while that's interesting, it's not a topic that really appeals to me. The whole point of this video is historical fictions, so obviously I should talk about the setting. In all honesty, not very strong. Probably the weakest thus far. Would probably forget that some of these scenes have been set in like 1950s or 60s, excluding like very specific topics that come up. Tying in with the lack of atmosphere and setting development, I think the writing style in this is just very like to the point. It's no frills, it's no flowers, it's just telling us a story. It does make it read more like a biography or an interview, and I kind of just want a little something more from it. So right there, that is two things that are kind of dings, but my biggest positive thus far has really been Evelyn. She's incredibly morally gray. She's brash, she's in your face, she knows what she wants and she will get it. Very much knows how to use her sexuality in a way to get what she wants, and I appreciate that. Evelyn's definitely not perfect, and in the current timeline, she certainly knows it, and honestly, I think it's that situation where she's old, she's rich, she doesn't have to care. Her determination to continue a career in Hollywood, even though she's hit all of these speed bumps, is incredibly impressive, particularly in the ways she really continues to make the audience want her, even though like they might learn all of these terrible things. She really plays the game well. Thus far though, I have had no investment in any of her relationships, and I don't think that's a good thing. I'm gonna put an abuse content warning right here because that's important. I will, however, say I do appreciate Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing of the abuse cycle in that marriage, just to bring attention to that and really showcase it in a realistic way. I do want to mention that the story thus far has had both gay and bi representation, and in like a 1950s, 60s Hollywood setting, that's pretty awesome because don't really see a lot of that. The other arguably main character is Monique, who is the journalist writing about Evelyn, and she's fine. She's there. I hate to say this, but my current estimated rating is gonna be 3 stars. It's fine. I'm really intrigued to see how the latter half of this book goes.
Hey y'all, so I have officially finished Evelyn Hugo, and I have such conflicting feelings about this book. Let's start on the positive side. For one, I think this is the epitome of how you can write a well-developed, morally gray character who grows throughout the story. When we start this book and we start Evelyn's story, she is roughly a teenager. When we finish it out, she is in her 70s. Even though she is still so selfish and conceited, she has actually grown so much, and it's genuinely impressive how she manages to change while still remaining so the same. She's so independent, she's so strong, she's cunning and unforgiving. At the same time, when she cares about something, she cares about it so deeply, and she will do anything for it. She really carried the story, and like that's not surprising because this is essentially a fictional biography. That's really what this is. Along with that, something I really enjoyed but didn't really realize until further into the story is with Monique, our journalist. She is very much a foil to Evelyn. In the beginning, she sees things in pretty black and white, where Evelyn starts to slowly blur the edges for her and influence her with her story in ways that Monique doesn't automatically pick up on. I really loved in the end of this story that the two of them have such a complicated relationship. It is very messy. I think it's so incredibly realistic and human, particularly for everything we see that happens between these two characters. Along with just Evelyn's entire personality, I think it's very interesting that we see a bit of exploration of her in terms of her Cuban heritage, in terms of her bisexuality, and really her celebrity status and how both of those things in her life are affected by it. My biggest issue with this story is that the second genre for this book is marked as romance on Goodreads. However, at no point in this story did I ever have genuine investment in any of Evelyn's relationships romantically. I will say I absolutely loved her friendship with Harry,
and her relationship with her daughter and the development they had to go through at the end, I thought was so well written. In terms of her romantic relationships, at no point did I feel that they truly loved each other. I did not see any passion growing there. I did not see the characters come to love each other. I just was told they loved each other, and that is not enough for me in a romance plotline. I think that's because of Taylor Jenkins Reid writing style with this, which could be the fact that this does read like a biography. It doesn't have a lot of nuances. It doesn't slowly try and nudge you in the direction of the conclusion she wants you to draw. She kind of just pushes you there, and I didn't like that. In the end, I'm going to be giving this 4 stars. I really enjoyed the character work in this. I just think there were some things that I wasn't as big a fan of. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point in Gods of Jade and Shadow. Sorry, I took the cover off. Also, the lighting in this clip is going to be whack. Apologies on that. This is my second Sylvia Moreno Garcia book. The first was Mexican Gothic, and I can definitely say these are very different stories. However, with that, her writing is still so atmospheric. Truly, she just creates beautiful scenery for you. No matter the setting, she manages to put you into this world, whether it be in the rural village where we start out, or once we are following her and the god into some of the cities where we are starting to get some of that American influence 1920s flapper culture. Even when she puts us into Xibalba, the spirit world, it truly is just so magical, and she manages to balance this historical fiction meets mythology so well. Following along with that, this reads like a fairy tale retelling. You can kind of see there are some influences from Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel, but I think she meshes them all together and revitalizes them with these links to Mexican folklore to make the story so much more interesting. Cassiopeia is incredibly brash. While when we start out she is very much a Cinderella character, she still has a backbone. She stands up for herself when she can. She realizes that her mouth can get her into trouble. On the opposite side, the god of death, Hunkame, initially, he's definitely a bit egotistical, very driven by his want for power. However, as he gets to know Cassiopeia and actually develops a bit of a friendship with her, we get to see a bit more personality from him. Something else that I just think has been very interesting to read about is the fact that it is based in Mexican folklore, so it's kind of like the older gods, whereas Cassiopeia definitely constantly keeps reverting back to the Catholicism she grew up with. Because she grew up with Catholicism, it's clearly ingrained in her to think a certain way, but then she literally has this god of old in front of her, and she kind of struggles with like, well, if he exists, does that mean that there's another one? Or, I don't know, it's just not something I'd ever really thought of before in like a mythology circumstance, but I'm really liking it here. Although there's not a consistent amount of action or even character development truly, I still have to say this is a pretty steady moving story. Like, if we're not getting one, we're getting the other kind of thing, which I think is interesting and is genuinely keeping me engaged throughout. Finally, something that isn't important at all, but I have to mention it, is the fact that Hunkame and his brother are warring over the power of Xibalba, which is the spirit world, and every single time I read Xibalba, the first thing that pops into my head is
To Xibalba? To Xibalba!
Yeah, so I have the urge to watch Road to El Dorado very strongly right now. I've really been enjoying this one, and if I hadn't already given an estimated 5-star rating previously in this video and have it bite me in the butt, I'd probably give this an estimated 5-star, but I think if I do that, I'm just tempting fate to piss me off. So we're gonna go with an estimated 4-star rating for the time being. and hope for the best. Hey y'all, so I have officially finished Gods of Jade and Shadow, and can I just say I'm so glad I ended on this one because I ended up really loving this. This was fantastic. This is based in Mayan mythology, and I think Sylvia Moreno Garcia did a fantastic job of making it educational while still flowing well within the story. I did do a bit more research, and it turns out that parts of this was based on the Popolva. I'm gonna look up and see if I was pronouncing that right. I believe that is a very early transcription of Mayan mythology. I just think it's impressive how Moreno Garcia managed to write out this fable based in so much of her mythology and culture while tying it into the 1920s in a fantastic way. Following along with that, I also think the way she wrote this story makes it feel as though it's not you reading it, it's being told to you. The storytelling aspect of this is very reminiscent to that of like an oratory storytelling, where it really feels as though someone just was telling this story and another person wrote it down and you're reading that. I know that's essentially what a story is. Wow, okay, great job there, Nat. As I mentioned in my last clip, this is definitely reminiscent of fairy tales, but I think one of the things I really loved about this is it's not just focused on the romance aspect. It is definitely an adventure story. There's a whole traveling aspect where we get to see all of these different settings throughout Mexico, and I loved that. However, there is still a romance aspect, and I think it can be best described as kind of a star-crossed lovers scenario, trying to be as non-spoilery as possible. I just loved the setup for that with the god of death and the maiden. As the story went on, I continued to just adore Cassiopeia. I think she's such a fun heroine to follow in this kind of a story because she does not match what you usually think of as the main female character in a fairy tale. On top of that, as we moved forward, Hyun Kame, you can truly see as he slowly starts to become more normal when it comes to human interactions and trying to connect and talk with Cassiopeia, and I loved how it genuinely seemed so natural, this like connection that the two of them had and how it built throughout the story to our ending, which I'm not gonna lie, I cried twice. No shame here, admitting it full on. In the end, I really just loved this. I think it's so nostalgic to like the fairy tales you grow up on, but it's reinvigorated, and putting it into Mayan mythology, which is not something I knew a lot about, had me just so much more intrigued and invested to learn about this. If you cannot tell, I gave this 5 stars. I loved it. I can tell I'm going to remember it for years to come, and I am definitely going to recommend this to anyone I know who is still a giant Disney kid, because I think they will love it. Alright y'all, so on that note, that is it for this 5x5 with a historical flair. I think I have learned that I need to pick up historical fiction more, because overall I'm pretty certain weren't all of my ratings like 4 stars and up. As always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Bye.